right, so for tonight we're going to go through a full body mobility circuit or class. So we're going to work on controlled articular rotations for all of our joints, and then work on some more multi-joint movements for our hips, spine, and shoulders. So throughout the class, we want to maintain good inter-abdominal pressure and positioning through our rib cage and pelvis. So when we're going through this class, we want to ensure that we're moving through the joint that we are targeting and not compensating elsewhere. So you can start seated or standing or kneeling or sitting on a chair, whatever is most comfortable for you. And we're going to start with the neck. So you're going to start by tucking the chin to the chest, and imagine a pencil coming out of the top of your head, and you're going to bring your right ear to your right shoulder, imagining that pencil is drawing a circle on the ceiling. So then you're going to bring your chin up towards the ceiling as your head goes back, and then bring your left ear to your left shoulder and continue through that circle. I'm going to do 3 reps in one direction, and then we'll switch directions. We want to keep these movements pain-free. So if you have a point where you get some pain, we'll just kind of add a little bit of a blip to the circle to avoid that pain, or just decrease the range of motion. If you feel a little bit sticky and you feel that tension on the what we call open angle, so through the muscle, then we can do just a gentle isometric contraction, so pushing our head into our hand, and just gently holding for a few seconds to see if it will release, and then continue through that range of motion. If we get some pain or restriction in the joint, pain we're going to back off, but if we get some restriction or almost like pinchiness in the joint, then we can go on the inside and do the same thing. So just a gentle contraction and see if that loosens things up. If not, you might want to get some treatment to get that joint moving. Okay, let's switch directions. So now we're going to the left. So starting with that chin tuck, pencil out of the head, bring that left ear to the left shoulder, then rotate back. And just on your own, if you feel those kind of restrictions, feel free to add a little isometric contraction. So I'm more restricted going to my left. Just going to do a gentle hold here. See if I can stimulate the nervous system to allow me a little bit more range of motion. Good. All right, now we're going to go into shoulder cars. So you'll need enough clearance. So if you're seated on your bum, you might need to come up into a more kneeling position, depending on the length of your arms and torso. We're going to start with a fist, and that's going to just create tension in the whole arm, so we're not bending our elbow or moving through our wrist. So we're going to start with a fist with our thumb pointed back, and I like to put my opposite hand on my rib cage because a common compensation is to open up or rotate, and I want to keep that trunk forward. So I'm going to lift my arm up as high as I can. Once I can't go any further, I'm going to screw that fist into the ceiling to rotate that thumb back, and then reach back as far as I can without opening up my trunk, without extending my back, while maintaining a solid trunk position. Okay, and we'll just do a couple at your own pace, just exploring that movement. And again, if you feel any pain, just back off a little bit, add a little blip to your circle, and then go get some treatment. Do one more, and then we're going to switch then range of motion. Good. So now we're going to start with our thumb facing forward. We're going to reach up as far as we can. Once we can't go any further, we're going to rotate that thumb forward and then reach back. So we're working a little bit more on the joint now. And you might find that you get a little bit more range of motion if you tend to be quite tight in the pecs, which will restrict the first way we did this. Good, one more, and then we're going to switch sides. Good. All right, left arm. So we're going to start with that thumb pointing back, squeezing the fist. If you find that you lose tension, you can grab onto something, either a ball of socks or a ball, just to give you that feedback to keep the tension. So we're going to reach up as far as we can, rotate that thumb back, and then reach back as far as we can without losing our rib position. Again, just pay attention side to side. Do you notice a difference? Are you restricted in a different area? Good, one more and then we'll switch ways. So now we're starting with the thumb facing forward, going up as far as we can, and then rotating that thumb back down, reaching back. Making sure we're breathing throughout, checking in. Am I compensating anywhere, or am I only moving through the shoulder? Good. All right, now we're going to move on to shoulder blade cars. So again, we can do this seated or standing. You're going to have your arms out in front of you. Again, we're making those fists, we're keeping that tension through the wrists and elbows and shoulders, and only moving through our shoulder blades. So we're going to pull those shoulder blades back together, almost like we're trying to crush a walnut between our shoulder blades. Then we're going to pull them down towards our back pockets. We're going to push them forward, like we're trying to push a car away from us. And then we're going to shrug those shoulders up towards the ears. And you'll notice as I go through this that my arms stay relatively parallel to the ground. So as I shrug up, my fists aren't coming above the height of my shoulders. They're almost moving in a bit of a rectangle, or I like to imagine the wheels of a train. So just do a couple in one direction. Again, just pay attention. Do you notice the difference side to side? If there's a sticky spot, maybe hold it for a few seconds. Get some extra feedback in that area. And then let's switch directions. So now we're going to pull our shoulders back again, crack that walnut, bring those shoulders up towards the ears, then push them forward, and then pull them down towards the back pockets. And when you start, your motion might look a little bit more like a square or rectangle. And then as you get more comfortable with the range, try to have a little bit more flow as you change directions. So it's a little smoother and more connected. Good. All right, let's shake that out. We're going to go into spinal cars next. So you're going to give yourself a big hug. Again, this is best to do seated, so you lock out the pelvis. If you're doing it standing, just put a chair or something behind you, or sometimes I like to use a foam roller to give me feedback. so I'm not hinging from the hips and then knocking it over. So you can use a different kind of constraint to make sure that you stay in spinal movement and not hip hinging movement. So like our neck cars, we're going to start with the chin to the chest. And then we're going to think about curling ourselves into a ball, almost like a crunch. So one at a time, we're opening up the vertebrae of our spine as far as we can without changing that pelvis position. Once we can't go any further, we're going to start rotating towards the right. And then arching back, and that arch comes from the pelvis first, and then that upper back, and then the neck. We're going to rotate towards the other side, and then start to close again. And again, just explore the movement, trying to get every little nook and cranny. As you come back, you can even lift those elbows to encourage a little bit more extension. And if you're seated, use the floor to give yourself feedback. So, are you seated equally on both sit bones? Or as you go to the left, is your right sit bone coming off of the floor or losing pressure? And that will let you know if you're actually shifting your body weight or you're controlling the movement through the spine. So we want to keep equal pressure on both sit bones. Let's change directions. So we'll go over to the left. Chin tuck, curl yourself into a ball. And then start to rotate and extend. If this is too much for your neck, you can keep your chin tucked. When you come back, do you feel your hip flexors grab? Again, if you do that, you might be leaning back instead of getting that movement through the vertebrae. So just pay attention to what your body's telling you, and then try to resist it. Good. All right. Shake that out, and then we're going to go into our segmental cat-camel, which is another great way to get some spinal movement. So we're going to start on all fours, shoulders stacked over the wrists, hips stacked over the knees. You can either keep your toes flat or you can tuck them under if you want an extra big toe mobilization or plantar fascia stretch. We're going to start at our pelvis and our hips, and we're going to stick imagine we have a tail, and we're going to stick that up towards the ceiling, kind of tilting that pelvis forward. Belly button comes towards the ground, and then one at a time, we're going to work our way through. When we get to that upper back, almost think an arrow coming out of your chest or your heart and pulling that through the shoulders. So we're actually moving forward versus sinking down towards the ground. And then head and neck come last. And we're going to reverse it. So chin tuck. And similar to our spinal cars, we're going to think about curling ourselves into a ball, one at a time, and then finishing with a pelvic tuck. So if we had a tail, we were trying to tuck and hide our tail. And then from here, we'll reverse again, almost working in a domino effect fashion, trying to move one segment at a time. Let's do a couple on your own. I like to imagine the wrinkling and unwrinkling of a shirt. So as I go into extension or cow, my shirt's wrinkling one at a time. And then when I transition to cat, I'm unwrinkling one Okay, we'll do one more of those. Make sure you're breathing throughout. And the amount of tension you have and how slow and controlled you go will determine the intensity of the exercise. So you can do this nice and slow and controlled with a bit of tension, or you can decrease the tension and just move a little bit more fluidly. All right, we're going to move on to hip cars. So we can either do this on all fours, or if your wrists and knees need a break, you can do this side lying. Okay, so I'm going to coach it first in all fours. Imagining a bowl of water on your back, we're going to stay nice and neutral through that spine because we only want to work on hip mobility here. We're going to bring that knee up towards our chest as far as we can without starting to round in our back. We're going to bring that leg out to the side. Once we're here, we're going to rotate that hip. Okay, so we're going to bring that knee down towards the midline and that foot out away from our body. From here, we're going to squeeze the glute and drive that heel up towards the ceiling without dumping through our low back. So imagine that bowl of water and then come back down to the floor. And then we're going to reverse that. So actually, we'll just start with, if you find that you're straightening your leg, we want to keep that knee locked. So you can either squeeze, again, a ball of socks or a washcloth, or just actively pull your heel to your bum and flex your foot towards your shin. So now we're going to reverse. So we're going to drive that heel up towards the ceiling by squeezing our bum. And then we're going to reach that knee around, almost like there's a pencil coming out of the knee. We're trying to draw a nice rainbow and coming back down to the ground. Okay, starting at the top again. So that knee is squeezed, nice tension. Bring that knee up towards the chest. Curl yourself around. Good. And reverse. I almost like to think of my hip as a math compass. So the hip is the pointy part that doesn't move. It stays in one place, but it rotates to allow the pencil, which is coming out of the knee, to draw that shape. Let's do one more in each direction, and then we'll switch sides. Good. So let's switch sides. I'll demo the side lying one this time. So if I'm on my side, I want to make sure that I'm not opening up through my pelvis, so I'm staying nice and stacked. Same thing though, I'm going to bring my knee up towards the chest, lift up towards the ceiling, squeeze the glute into that hip extension, and then come back down to midline. And then back to the start. To reverse, I'm going to squeeze my glute to extend the hip, either back if you're sidelining or up towards the ceiling if you're on all fours. Then I'm going to reach around, try to get as much hip rotation and abduction as I can without rotating through my trunk, and come back to the start. So we'll do 3 more of those in each direction, either side lying or on all fours. And there are some differences outside of being able to control the position to the side lying versus on all fours. So on all fours, because of gravity, you're going to have more demand on hip extension. And again, because of gravity, side lying is going to be harder on those lateral glute muscles. All right, last one. Keep that tension, keep that movement through the hip, not compensating anywhere else. Good. All right, we'll come back up to a seated position and we're going to work on some knee rotations. So again, you can sit on the floor, you can sit on a chair. You're going to bring your foot up towards your shin to lock out the ankle. We also want to be aware of what our hip is doing. So we kind of want to lock out the hip, lock out the ankle, and only move through our knee. So you're going to hold on to your knee here so you get some feedback, and using your heel as your pivot, you're going to rotate that knee towards the outside of the body and then rotate that knee towards the inside of the body. And you'll see that my foot is moving as a result of that rotation, but I'm not moving my foot. So the ankle stays locked and I'm rotating back and forth. If I'm limited in one area, then I might use my hand to pull myself deeper into that position. Good, a couple more of those. This is a great one to do before any squatting. Or even more cyclical activities like running, because the knee does rotate, so we want to have control over that positioning. Okay, let's try the other side. So locking up the ankle, making sure the hip is not doing the movement, and then working on that rotation. And just noting differences side to side. My surgical knee, and clearly I need a little bit more work on that internal rotation. So again, I can use my hands to encourage that rotation in whichever area I'm restricted. And we'll do one more in each direction. Good. Now we're going to move on to ankle cars. So you're going to imagine a pencil coming out of your toes. I like to hold my knee up towards my chest to make sure I'm not moving through my hip or my knee. So imagine that pencil and then draw a circle with that big toe, finding every little nook and cranny. And you can either keep the toes in neutral or you can incorporate them. So as you point your toes down, you're going to curl your toes, and as you lift them up, you're going to extend your toes towards the top of your foot. Again, you control the intensity by how much tension you're putting through those muscles across the joint. Let's switch directions. And pay attention, are you getting any cramping at all? Cramping is our body telling us that it doesn't really like or can't control what we're asking it to do. So we always want to flirt with that line of cramping. If we can push through the cramping, we can tell the body that this position is safe and we have control over it. Good, let's switch sides. Do you notice a difference side to side? Did you notice a difference in the cramping depending on which direction you went? These are all cues and clues to let us know what we might need to work on. So we don't want to just go through the motions, we want to be intentional and reflective Bringing awareness, switch directions, bringing awareness into how our body moves and how our body responds to movement. Good. All right. Forgot a couple upper body ones, so we'll do that before we go into a multi-joint shoulder. So we're going to do elbow cars. You're going to keep your elbows tucked. You can either, if you have trouble maintaining tension, go with the fists. If you're able to create tension with an open hand, that's great as well. So we're going to keep the elbows tucked so we're not moving through the shoulders. We're going to keep the wrists in neutral, so I don't want to see any T-Rex hands. And we're going to rotate as far as we can, palms up towards the ceiling. This is called supination, or like, I want some soup. And then we're going to rotate our palms down as far as we can. And again, notice, is there a difference side to side? Does one side pronate more than the other, or supinate more than the other? Or is one side more restricted in general? I'm right-handed, spend a lot of time typing or texting with my right hand, so generally it feels tighter in that elbow in both directions. So this can be a great way to keep some movement going throughout the day if you work at a computer. And you can kind of hold each position for a few seconds to gain more control at end range. Good. Okay, we're going to move on to the wrist. So I like to hold my forearm, again, to avoid any compensation elsewhere. Again, you can do this with an open hand or fist. I prefer fist because I almost work on that finger control at the same time. So I'm going to curl my wrist up, and then imagine the pencil coming out of the knuckle of your big finger and draw that circle as big as you can. The wrist is a little bit more awkward because there's so many joints that make up the wrist and hand, and so you might feel some tendons flicking across each other. You might get some little clicks and cracks. That's all okay. Just work in the range that you have and try to find every little nook and cranny of motion you can. Let's switch directions. It's a great one to do before and after you do a lot of wrist work. So push-ups or bench press, cleans, handstands, yoga. Good, let's switch sides. And you might use a little bit more tension as a warm-up to get that strength and control in the joint. And then you might, as a cool down, decrease that tension and just let that range of motion happen a little bit more fluidly and get the blood flowing. Good. All right, so we're going to work into some multi-joint now, starting with shoulder swimmers. So you're going to pull your shoulder blades back, and that's because I don't want you to move through the shoulder blades. I want this to be through the shoulders and wrists only. We want to make sure our ribs are stacked over our pelvis. And we're going to reach our arms behind our back, almost like we're being handcuffed. If you're not able to do that without the shoulders dumping forward, just keep your hands on your side. From here, we're going to lift our hands off of our back as far as we can without dumping forward or without arching our back. And then we're going to straighten those arms out. And we're going to rotate those palms forward, thumbs up towards the ceiling, and reach above our head, but almost imagine that there's this glass wall here and we need to stay away from it. Once we get up to about parallel to the ground or shoulder height, we're going to bend those elbows again and reach behind our head. And then let's reverse that direction. So you're going to straighten the arms, rotate those thumbs down towards the ground, and bend those elbows so the back of our wrists end up on the small of our back again. So we'll do a couple of those at your own pace. Each time seeing if you can get a little bit further, squeezing those shoulder blades together. So all that movement is happening through the shoulder and wrist, shoulder and elbow. Our wrists stay neutral. You could also imagine that at kind of like ear level out, there's an electrical fence and you want to go through the motion without touching that fence. Pay attention to the rest of your body. Are you still ribs stacked over pelvis? Are you still breathing three-dimensionally? Is your head and neck nice and long, little chin tuck? And if you want a bit of a brain challenge, try the infinity. So you're going to start with one hand on the top of your head, one hand behind your back. You're going to straighten both elbows at the same time. Rotate the shoulders in opposite directions. So one thumb comes up, one thumb comes down, and then bend the elbows to reverse. Really squeeze those shoulders back. I find when I do the infinity, I start to think too much about the movement and lose my core positioning. Good. All right. Shake that out. We're going to move on to our hips and finish off with some 90-90. So you're going to sit on the floor in a 90-90 position. So if you were to look at both legs, they'd be at 90-degree angles. If you're not able to get into this position comfortably, you can put a block under your hips or a rolled up towel to just prop yourself up a little higher. Or you can use blocks or books to give yourself some support through your hands. So we're all going to start with our left leg forward in that 90-90 position. And keeping my ribs stacked over my pelvis, I'm going to rotate towards that left thigh. Okay, so I'm not twisting, I'm rotating through my hips. So I'm keeping that cylinder position through my core. From here, I'm going to bring my chest towards my left knee, actively if I can, so arms across the chest, or if you need a bit of support, you can use your hands, but I still want you to actively close that angle. So you're imagining an orange between your tummy and your thigh, and you're trying to crush that orange. Okay, so whether you're using your hands for support or you're able to control it actively, you're trying to crush that orange, keeping a nice long spine, and then we're going to come back up to neutral. Now we're going to rotate, again, not twisting through the trunk, but rotating through the hips towards that right or that back leg. From here, we're not going to fold over, we're just going to try and rotate through that hip and get as much rotation as we can. And think about actively pulling ourselves deeper into that stretch. And you can do a little bit more internal rotation by thinking about lifting your ankle off the ground. Probably won't move anywhere, that's okay, but you want that engagement on the side of the hip. Let's rotate back towards the left leg or the front leg. We'll hinge forward. Coming back up. And then rotating through those hips towards that back leg. Good, let's do one more of each. So we're rotating, that belly button is coming with us, aligning with that thigh, and we're folding at the hips, crush that orange. And then coming back up by pushing that thigh towards the ground, and then rotating towards that back leg. Good. From here, we're going to do our transition. So you're going to push your left knee into the ground so it doesn't come with you yet. You're going to take your right knee and you're going to open it up. Still pushing with that left leg down. You're opening up that right hip as much as you can. Once you can't go any further, then you'll transition to both sit bones, but keep pulling your knees apart until you get into a bear sit position. Okay, from here, we're going to transition over to the right. So we're going to start by pulling our knee down towards the right side. We're going to rotate that left hip in, so you're going to bring your knee close to the midline. Once you can't go any further, then both knees are going to actively pull towards the ground to put you into the 90-90 on the other side. You might find that you have either more or less mobility on this side, so feel free to switch up where your blocks are. And then we're going to start with our rotations. So check that pelvis, rib position, rotate towards that front hip, and then hinge towards that thigh. Going as far as we can. Should feel a nice stretch in the glute, and then coming back up. Then we're going to rotate towards that back leg. So we're putting ourselves into internal rotation, staying nice and tall. Nice breath here. And then rotating towards that front leg again. Hinging, staying nice and long through the spine. Bringing that chest towards the thigh. Crush that orange juice. Coming back up to neutral. Rotating towards that back leg. Staying nice and tall. Holding for a breath. And then we're going to do one more in each direction. So we're rotating that belly button towards that thigh. Hinging through the hips. Again, use your hands for support if you need to. Get a nice stretch in the glute. And then control yourself up by pushing that right leg into the ground to upright yourself. Rotate towards that left leg. We're going to now do a couple transitions side to side. So now that we've gained some mobility and control, we're going to integrate it through more dynamic movement. So we're going to start, right knee is pushing down towards the ground, left knee is opening up. Once I can't go any further, I'm pulling my knees apart and rolling onto both sit bones, still actively pulling those knees apart. Glutes are squeezed. Then I'm going to rotate my right hip by bringing my knee down towards the ground as I actively push both knees to the ground to get to the 90-90 on the other side. Okay, hold for a breath. And reverse. So we're going to push that left knee down so it doesn't come with us. We're opening up that right hip. Pulling those knees apart, staying nice and tall. Don't collapse through the low back as you transition onto your sit bones. And then transition to the other side. Left knee comes down. Both knees actively pull yourself into the new position towards the ground. We're going to do one more in each direction. We're going to open up that left hip. See, my body rotates with it. Staying nice and tall. Pull those knees apart. Pry those hips apart. Stay nice and tall on the sit bones. Then that right hip rotates down. Both knees actively pull yourself down into the position. I'm starting with my hands up here. If you need support with your hands, that is totally fine. Just make sure the movement stays active, so engaged with tension. Okay, last one. Lift that right knee up. Rotate up as far as you can. Once you can't go any further, that left knee can come off the ground, but actively pull those knees apart. And then rotate to transition to the other side. Good. All right, we'll just end with a little windshield wiper to get those hips, give the hips some love after tension. So you can either do this kind of reclined seated or with your back on the floor. You're just going to have your feet wider than hip width apart, and then just drop your knees to one side. Hold for a few seconds, whatever feels good, and then drop them to the other side. So if you want to do this on your back, hip width, wider than hip width apart with the feet, and then you're just dropping one side to the other. This one on your back gives you a little bit more of a hip flexor stretch if you feel like you need to open those up a bit. Do one more in each direction. All right, thanks for joining me. Hope your body feels nice and loved.